welcome to Coffee with Developers. My name is Sead and my guest today is Lyubomir Bozhinov. He has started coding in high school, then he went to get a master's degree in renewable energy and eventually came back to software engineering. He has done a lot of projects, he has done a lot of coding, tried out different tech stacks, different roles, and eventually became a team lead and a lead engineer. And that's exactly what we want to talk with him about. We want to talk about his personal career development, to get some career advices also for other tech talent who want to climb the ladder, and talk about what's it like to be a team lead and lead engineer. So please welcome Lyubomir. Hello, Lyubomir. How are you doing?
Hey, Sad. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. You are joining us from Sofia, right?
Yes, Sofia, Bulgaria. I'm a lead engineer here at the EPAM Systems office.
Okay, perfect. Then basically, let's just jump into the topic. So maybe you could shortly introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you developed your interest in tech and software development.
I'd love that, but maybe first off, let me just say that I'm really glad to be part of this event, because a couple of years ago I had the absolute pleasure to go to Vienna to one of the World Congresses, and
Oh, really?
I saw
Cool.
yes, I actually saw Steve
How did you like
Wozniak.
it?
I saw Steve Wozniak live, so that was a very high point for me personally, and
Okay.
it was just crammed full of amazing people and lecturers, and I do feel a bit of trepidation being part of the team now, if I may say so.
That's cool. Did you manage to get an autograph or something?
Sadly, no. There was I think about 1,000 people in a queue before me, so I was just rushing towards
I remember that. I was following him from the main stage to the place where we did the autographs and so on. I think I got hit like 1,000 times with elbows and everything just going through this. So it was really a weird experience, but yeah, cool. So didn't know that, but cool if you have visited our events and if you have liked it. But then, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, to get back to your question, at a very early age, I think I had an interest in tech in general, and probably started off with video games, as every child of the 90s. I disassembled my computer when I was 10. I had some spare parts left over, got some help, learned a bit about hardware, then got a bit into software by trying to do some mods for video games. And then I sort of tried to get serious about programming when I was in high school. But then, teenage boys, I still just wanted to play the video games rather than make them. And C++ made me give up at an early age. So
The
for about
pointers.
oh yeah, pointer arithmetic to be precise. That was a big no-no for my 14-year-old brain. And for about 10 years, I think I just gave up on software engineering as a whole. I tried to pursue other paths. I developed a very strong interest in green technology, environmental sustainability, and renewable energy as a field. I went on to attain a couple of master's degrees on the subject. But when I decided to actually come back home to Bulgaria, I couldn't find a fulfilling and rewarding job, even in terms of financial compensation, in that industry. So I thought to myself, what else am I good at? What do I have an aptitude for? And which industry right now seems to be like a hotspot for young, motivated people who want to work hard and maybe build a career for themselves. And I mean, I want to say the rest is history, but it was maybe 6 months of 15-hour days where I had to get to grips with the basics before I could actually land an internship, and then I just started my first job afterward.
How did you decide kind of what basics or what programming language or what tech stack or whatever you want to start with? Because you said C++ made you make a step back. So I assume you didn't start then with C++ again.
No, not really. I tried to make it a very reasonable choice, but still ended up doing something very unreasonable. I started learning JavaScript, C# and .NET, and Java at the same time.
Okay.
And I just ended up picking up the one that I liked most, to be honest. That's how I landed my first job as a front-end engineer.
But did you have a concrete project like to learn on, or did you just say, okay, I want to, learn a programming language? Because usually I hear a lot of advices like, okay, let's start a concrete project, concrete challenge or problem and solve it, or did you do it the other way around?
It was probably the other way around because I did maybe hundreds of little to-do MVC type projects in the different languages. Just the classic curriculum type of learning a programming language.
And would you do it? Would you do it differently today with your knowledge of today?
Definitely. With hindsight, I now know for a fact that learning a new language is much better if you actually start working on a real project, start trying to apply what you know immediately to solving a problem.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Then that's basically a first advice that we collected here, right? So if you want to learn something new, just do it with a concrete problem or project. Very cool. Because you studied or you have been interested in green technology and you have a master's degree in renewable energies, right?
Yes, correct.
So have you ever thought about connecting your profession as a software developer with the passion for green tech?
In all honesty, I've only been thinking about it so far. I've had some ideas over the years, and what I seem to be lacking at this point in my career is the maturity to actually take an idea and create a working business model around it. So not yet, but maybe someday. But I do have a very deep-seated interest in green tech, and I think it has the potential to be one of the emerging fields globally, which will redefine how we envision both tech and life in general. Well, that might be overstating it a bit, but I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah, I'm optimistic about that too because it connects basically two very important worlds. The one thing is that technology is everywhere, but also it is for a good purpose, right? So I think that's definitely a very interesting field. But let's come back to yourself. So today you are a team lead, you are a lead engineer at EPAM, as you said. What kind of projects, what types of projects do you work on?
Well, EPAM as a company, I don't want to talk too much about corporations, policies, etc. But we do have different projects and different clients. So everything you can think about, we probably have one of those. In my specific case, I've been working in a couple of domains, more specifically in the airlines industry. So that was my previous project and account. My current project is, well, supply chain management, logistics, and after sales services is probably the business domain is how I would describe it best. But I don't want to get into specific company names, etc. because of NDA.
But just like of the types of projects, I mean, like, is it more like is it web development stuff, or is it enterprise applications, or what kind of projects and technologies are involved?
I have been working in web projects mostly. That's actually been my primary focus over the years as well. My previous one was actually a core SDK, so a suite of components, UI, and some layers of communication and interaction that other projects could be built upon. And my current one actually touches a bit on enterprise applications, a bit of machine learning, and some very complex systems which have been operating for more than 20 years now and have been built on in quite a complicated way, if I may put it mildly.
So you also need to do a transformation a bit from some legacy stuff to more modern stacks?
I've had some experiences with that as well.
Yeah.
But legacy code is always quite a challenge, no matter the technology, and I think new is better in that regard 100% of the time.
Yeah. Okay, but let us talk a bit about, I mean, as you said, like today you're a team lead, but did you plan to, grow the career ladder, or did it just happen?
I wouldn't say it was just a spontaneous event,
Mhm.
but it wasn't completely predetermined either, because I've always had an interest in communicating with people, in how teams actually assemble and and become efficient and achieve goals together. But on the flip side, I started off as an individual contributor, as a junior engineer in 2015, so that's relatively recently.
Mhm.
And so for the first couple of years, I was mostly just interested in being exceptional at what I did, and I wasn't, of course, because at the beginning everyone makes mistakes and lots of them. But I tried to learn and spend more time and invested lots of efforts into growing as an engineer, until I actually eventually realized that to become more efficient, I would need to have a larger impact on the team. So probably at the senior level, I understood that if I want to achieve more results and create more value, I would actually have to step up to a different role.
Mhm.
And I said step up, but it's to me at least it's more of a lateral move, because the skill set required for the team lead's position is a bit different to being a senior engineer,
Mhm.
or at least that's what I think.
How different is it? Like, what is the main differences that you see?
Well, to me, management is basically something completely separate from the tech skills that most people who get promoted to the team lead role actually have been
Mhm.
investing in and growing over the years. And suddenly you're thrust into a new role where you're expected to be able to communicate efficiently at a lot of different levels, to be
Mhm.
able to lead people and to delegate appropriately to the right task to the right person, to be able to see the bigger picture, to actually take yourself, if I may use air quotes here,
Mhm.
out of the equation for a bit, to see it, from the top, and how your efforts actually contribute to the larger whole, and how the efforts of each individual contributor should actually be directed. And
Mhm.
that
I
is
mean, that's
both.
not easy to learn, right? I mean, it is something that maybe you need to have kind of a talent for, like especially with communication skills and so on. You need to feel comfortable with that. How did you manage it for you, for yourself? Like, did you kind of really said, I really want to learn it, and sat down and trained and whatever? Or how do you think? Like, what was the reason why it worked for you?
Well, I think it was twofold. In my opinion, there is some natural aptitude to all of this, because we can't undervalue the talent some people have for communicating with others. We can't undervalue personal charisma. On the other hand, it is actually a set of established practices. There is a huge knowledge base on the subject of management and people management and being a better or more inspirational leader, including lots of courses, of course, which are the modern way of doing things. But since I'm a bit old-fashioned, I took the same approach I took to software engineering as an individual contributor, and I just spent a lot of extra time reading books and trying to learn and trying to understand as much as I could about the responsibilities that the team lead should have, and how they should actually go about solving the different types of problems that you're faced with on a daily basis.
Mhm. And while becoming a team lead, I mean, I assume that you became a team lead from basically the team where you already have been, right? Like you have been promoted from the inside. Um, Did you face challenges there? Because often I also kind of hear and see that basically when you get promoted from inside the team, that it's not that easy, because you have now to lead the team and colleagues and people that you have recently worked with in a team on a same level, let's call it like that.
That's a very interesting aspect of the transition to the team lead role, in my opinion, as well. When I first got into a leadership position a couple of years ago, it was before joining EPAM. It was actually before going for a bit to Vienna, but maybe a bit about that later. I became a tech lead at the company I was working for at that point in time, and there was a bit of the no one is a prophet in their own village syndrome, and I found it a bit more challenging to exert any of the official influence that I supposedly had by being the tech leader of the department. However,
because you have been friends with the people before, or
and we continued being friends after as well. But now the power dynamics were a bit different, and I had to find other ways and other approaches towards them to make them actually understand that I didn't want to be their boss, rather than help them and our team as a whole achieve more, because I thought that I knew what I was doing. Of course, on many an occasion I didn't, but I learned a lot from that first tech lead role, and it was an eye opener, to say the least, especially about the problem you just described.
So what is your, let's say, one or two main advices to people who just recently become a tech lead, or for the beginning phase when you just get promoted and so on, like what to consider? So what is your main advice here?
So I've already said that you should probably learn a bit about the role in the classic, management books. That I don't want to start listing off titles, but I will add a couple of more of my lessons from my perspective. I think the next one is to learn to trust your peers, your team as much as possible, and try to delegate as much work as you can without that having a negative impact on the project, or if you're in a service company like I am, on the client account, on the velocity of the entire team. So it's going to be a lot of judgment calls, but it's going to be all right if you learn to trust your people and probably try to delegate some of the more challenging and complex and interesting tasks that you yourself would like to do, because after all, you got promoted because you're a brilliant engineer, etc., etc.
Let's talk a bit about delegating work, because what I often see is that when you become a manager, or when you become more promoted into a lead position, not just in software development but in general, you still tend to basically do the old work as well. Like you try to solve the problems yourself. You find it hard to delegate stuff, and I wouldn't even say that you don't trust the team, but everyone loves to see the work done in a way you do it yourself. So how do you overcome this issue to be able to really delegate also the big problems to your team, so that you yourself have enough time doing your own business? Because at some point you also struggle to put everything together. You cannot solve everything yourself, and still do the people management, the team lead, the product management, and so on. So do you have an advice on that?
I do have a bit of advice. I am actually in a hybrid role, so I'm also expected to write code. And even if you are in a purely management based position, you still feel that urge to go about solving the problem yourself. And I think that, as you said, you have to try to develop trust in your people and believe that they will be able to solve that problem, however challenging it might be. Of course, you can't be completely hands off. You might need to step in and actually help them out, especially if it's probably the first time you've given someone a very difficult and complex issue. And my approach, the one that I found to work flawlessly, at least with with motivated and generally good engineers is to try to maybe spend some time one-on-one with them before they kick off the task, just to discuss the approach that they're going to take solving the problem. So you identify very early on if there is going to be any major roadblock in what they're trying to do. That way, down the road, when maybe they've been stuck on something for a couple of days, you know exactly where they should be in the implementation phase that you two agreed on, and you can actually step in and help them a bit, even with some advice or the roboduck methods, because that often helps me solve other people's problems more often than not. It's just they wanted to tell me something, and while explaining it, they managed to come up with the solution. And I think that trust is actually built over time, and it just establishes itself naturally in a team, because you see that people have different skill levels and aptitudes, and they deal with different problems in different ways. But you somehow have to put your ego aside for a minute, because you were, after all, probably in the rock star engineer before you became promoted. But the idea that someone else might do it in another way, which might be better or might be worse, of course, that should be something you ignore. That thought, that nagging feeling that you can do it better, because
So
after
that's a
all,
good advice also, yeah, what you said, to put the ego aside. I think that's really a good advice, because it's not about, being there as a manager and being more important than others or whatever. It's actually about mentoring the people and coaching them, and basically create the atmosphere for them and then the environment for them to do a good work, right?
exactly, because after all, if you want to grow into the leadership and management role, the purely management role, what will your responsibility be? It's going to be to build people and help them grow and achieve their goals while they're actually solving the problems of your clients. So either way, you have to start thinking about the bigger picture and not focusing on how great you are.
That is actually super true, because when you become a team leader, when you get promoted into management, your task obviously is not anymore to solve the specific problem or to solve a challenge. Your task is actually to create an environment and to create teams who are able to solve these problems. And I think that many people don't understand it in the first from the beginning, right? Okay, you said before that it's important to put aside your own ego, so the team can grow. But what if you have team members who, how do you manage crisis and conflicts within the team, where, two guys, let's say, are discussing a solution and maybe it's not clear how to handle that? So how do you approach this?
Well, if it's an interpersonal problem, you would obviously have to step in and talk individually with them, maybe eventually get them together, so everything is out in the open and the air is clear, and you have to make them you have to make them understand that you're all on the same team. You have to work together to achieve the same goals, after all. And yes, sometimes people are a bit more difficult, but I found that everyone eventually comes around to the idea that their individual contributions are much more appreciated when they're also helpful to other people. Because everyone wants to feel like the special snowflake who's creating this amazing piece of code, and a lot of people actually are. And it really it's really important then for the team lead to recognize that contribution in specific and meaningful ways, I think, because people tend to be less hostile to team members if they feel like their efforts are not in vain, and even small compliments tend to make them ease off a bit. But if it's it's about something purely technical. I like to think that most of the technical challenges that we face are relatively objective and therefore more easy to solve, because it just becomes a matter of a public forum in the team. You discuss it and try to list the pros and cons, maybe do a spike, maybe see some metrics and numbers in terms if it's, for example, a performance problem. So there is usually a better way to do it. And then again, everyone should just forget about their ego and go about solving the problem in the best way possible with the correct tooling. Because I am a huge fan of the old cliche, use the right tool for the right job, right? And
Yeah, that's a good one. Yes, I have that as a question prepared as well because
really,
I mean there is a lot of frameworks out there, a lot of tools, a lot of libraries, a lot of different ways how to solve a specific problem. And I know that you have tried out or you have worked with Angular, for example. You have worked with React. You have worked server side with Node.js. You have tried out different frameworks and so on. And how do you basically for your teams and for your projects? What I often see is that people, talk way too much about what framework to use or what kind of tool to use. And don't get me wrong, it is good to think about it before you start the project. But sometimes the discussion is a bit over-engineered and it's kind of how do you say, like a flame war or something like that. How do you overcome this and how do you approach this, let's say, infrastructures and architecture and framework decisions and so on in your teams?
so having mentioned Angular and React, I'm gonna start off from those two. I've worked with both, even with both of them in a single project at one point. And in my opinion, it's a matter of the team composition more than the framework or the library in this case. I would probably choose Angular if the team is a bit of a mixture between more junior developers and a couple of senior engineers, for example. And I wouldn't really kick off a project with React these days if it's just junior people, or I would probably let more senior engineers work on a React project for a couple of reasons. It's a library and it's a more difficult ecosystem to navigate if you don't have the experience and know what you're doing. Like it's much easier to shoot yourself in the foot, proverbially, with React than with Angular because of how opinionated Angular is, being a complete framework.
Yeah. But do you assist your team, or do you think it's good for also the juniors to try out many different frameworks and libraries and tools, or do you say, okay, let's take this one and learn it and be the best professional with Angular, or do you think it's a good idea for juniors to deep dive also into other frameworks?
As a lead engineer, I've had the pleasure to work with some exceptional people and oversaw the transition of a couple of them from mid-level to senior engineers. And I'm of the opinion that if someone is curious about another tech stack, that curiosity should be encouraged, and they should invest some time, maybe an hour of their workday even, to try to learn and pick up the new framework. So a couple of my Angular engineers actually wanted to learn React, and I can just encourage them to do it. And I think that everyone should pursue their curiosity when it comes to technology, because there is always something new coming up. It's not always worth investing your time into, but everything you actually do and everything new you learn helps you become better at what you're currently doing. So it's not wasted time if they try to pick up React rather than diving deeper into Angular, because understanding how React works and how they can use it in a project and how they can structure a project using that tool, they can then transfer some of that knowledge back into the Angular ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Do you also think that knowing a little bit about different frameworks and tools helps helps to easier see the big picture, because then you are not too much into just one direction and think too much about that. Do you think that also helped you with your career?
Most certainly. I have been working from time to time on the back end of web projects, and I have some interest in languages like Rust, for example, and WebAssembly.
Right, that's cool. Yeah.
I think Rust is exceptionally cool, especially since we already talked about C++, and I just see it as a marked improvement over that generation of languages. Memory safety and all that.
Yeah.
It's just a pleasure to work with, especially if you consider how verbose and helpful the error messages actually are. I don't mean to, go into a tangent here, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think that going back to your original question, seeing different perspectives, at least the back end of the current project, is helpful for everyone who's working on a web development project. But I would encourage people to actually go beyond that. Yes, people are throwing the words AI and machine learning everywhere these days, but it's a very, very interesting domain. So maybe having a quick look at TensorFlow.js if you're a JavaScript developer, or just picking up some Python, just the basics of a general purpose language like that, which is appropriate everywhere. That is going to be an incredible boost to whatever you're doing right now in your current project. And the same is true for just about any language or framework. Especially if you're in web development, you should be aware at least of the entire stack of the front end and the back end and the databases. So that's the piece of advice I would give here.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. Did you ever regret to, climb the career ladder and become a lead engineer? I know a lot of people who, have been ambitious and they wanted to, become a team lead and so on. But after a while, they said, I really loved coding and doing my part of the job, and let's let someone else do the team leading.
I mean, on occasion I do, especially when I make a mistake, and I make a lot of them because we humans are inherently fallible, and we're not perfect all the time, right? But I try to own up to each and every one, and I try to learn from it and not to repeat it, ideally.
Yeah. What are some easy mistakes that basically you could say could be easily avoidable?
I think that the number one mistake is to go into pure management directly rather than move through a hybrid role like the one that I am at the moment. Pure management means you're expected to possess the entire lateral skill set from day one. And right now I have days where I only do coding and I don't have any management responsibilities. And vice versa, of course. But I think that I've managed to more smoothly transition into that role because of my current position. And if possible, don't go into the pure management role without going through this hybrid phase. It's more taxing than just one or the other, but I think it's worth it in the long run. And of course, the first mistakes are going to be related to what we've talked about so far, to trying to do everything yourself, to not believing your team, and right, to trying to actually hide your mistakes. Because I think the absolute worst thing you could do in a position of authority as the tech lead or team lead is to appear perfect to your team members. Actually being open and honest and transparent with them, I have found it helps you lead them better because they trust you more and they empathize with you if you're authentic and honest rather than trying to be the textbook manager perfect.
Let's talk about giving feedback to your team members, because that's super important. So are there any advices that you can give to the audience, like how important is it to give feedback and in what way you should give it?
I found that, and this is something that I don't really do myself, but the best approach here is to actually do it often. So as often as possible, even if it's just a little bit of feedback to steer people in the right direction. But in terms of the content of feedback, it should ideally be the same as constructive criticism, right? You start off with some of the best things you've seen them accomplish over the last several months, for example, or several weeks, depending on how often you actually give people feedback. So after establishing that you actually like what they've done and how they're moving in the direction that you've both agreed on, for example, on a one-to-one. So at that point, you might list off some areas that need improvement. And when I say list off, I don't mean just bullet points,
Yeah.
fix this, improve that. But I found that suggestions about valid approaches work best. What I mean by that is when someone feels that they're being critiqued, it's usually a defensive stance and no one really tries to hear what you want to say. But if you present the information in a gentle enough way and suggest exactly how one might go about improving or fixing a problem, then people tend to be a bit more receptive. And here I think empathy plays a big role, and actually knowing the people you work with. So being a leader rather than being, a
Yeah.
manager or a boss. It's,
Absolutely. Yeah, empathy, I think, is a very, very important, let's call it skill. I think I have even on my Twitter profile pinned it, like that without empathy, you cannot become a good leader, because it's just such an important leadership skill. There is also a very good book that I would recommend to the audience. It's called Radical Candor. So maybe some of you know that, from Kim Scott. It's very eye-opening, and she's also talking a lot about giving feedback and giving direct feedback, because she says that in the beginning of her career she didn't give too much feedback because she had good relations with the people she worked with, and then she didn't want to kind of make these relationships suffer. So she was always kind of trying to give soft feedback, but never too direct. And at the end, she learned that maybe that's maybe not the best way. It's really a good book, Radical Candor. Do you know it, Lyubomir?
It's on my read list. I'm currently actually reading, refreshing the principles by Ray Dalio because of his new book. So there is a lot of talk about transparency and radical honesty in that book as well. So I'm definitely going to have a look at Kim Scott's book as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I really tried to implement for myself. It's not that easy, Reading something is always different than just implementing it. But it helped a lot. Like, it also helped actually, save relations, because if you give direct feedback at the end, they will appreciate it. The honesty and transparency, as you say. Yeah, good. Then let's see. We are shortly running out of time, but it's an interesting discussion. So thanks for joining again. Tell
Thank you,
me,
Sal.
how do you relax from work and make sure to get the right work-life balance? Let's call it like that.
Well, traveling used to be my hobby, me and my wife's, of course, and the two of us would visit different countries when we had the opportunity. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. So we try to lead an active lifestyle because it's quite vital, I think, for the mind to actually do some sports from time to time. And in our case, it's tennis, and we really love the game. It's an incredible pleasure to see the slow evolution of your game, it's very, very similar to how one builds a career, in my opinion.
Mm.
So it's the little efforts and the little steps, the incremental changes that eventually turn into a very nice serve.
You said you like to play games when you have started also coding and so on. Do you still play some games?
Well, I don't seem to be able to find the time these days, sadly. But I want to go back to The Witcher 3 and do it again from scratch, because it's to this day one of my favorite games of all time. And of course, some of the classic ones. I try to get together with some of my older friends, and I say older because we're all over 30 these days, and we of course play Dota, but Dota 1.
Yeah.
So this doesn't happen as often as it used to be, but it's a very
Yeah.
nice way to relax and spend an evening with the boys,
Mm.
have a valid excuse for some video games and scotch.
Yeah, that's that's good. That's very cool. Yeah, so I would say that we are basically somewhere at an end, but let's make a short summary. So, would you be comfortable to share 5 quick advices for everyone who is in software engineering and plans to become a team lead? So, what should they kind of do?
Okay, so I think first off, as we've covered already, try to learn as much your new role and to be the role before you become the role. Definitely read a couple of books about management, because you're going to be required to delegate a lot of work, and you have to be able to recognize the aptitudes and abilities of different people. Of course, never hide any of your mistakes. Try to be as radically transparent and honest with people as possible. And I think check the ego is one of my favorite lessons from
Mhm.
Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willing and Leif Babin. That's one of their lessons in their book, but I'm going to appropriate it for our discussion today, because as we talked earlier in our conversation, ego is the enemy of good leadership. And
Mhm.
finally, I think, of course, that you have to think of the bigger picture rather than just yourself. You have to think of the entire system of interactions between people and code and everything in between. So I think
Okay.
we got up to 5.
Perfect. So, Lyubomir, it was a really big pleasure to talk with you on these topics. I wish you all the best in the future. I hope to see you again at one of our events, but not just virtual, also in person in the future. Maybe also with some sounding names like Steve Wozniak or someone else, maybe. And yeah, it was a really pleasure talking with you. Thank you very much.
Likewise said, it was an absolute pleasure for me as well, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next live event. I really miss those.
Okay,
Thanks
perfect.
again, and
Perfect.
have an
Thanks. Bye
amazing day.
bye.
Bye.